This off. Hello, and thank you to everybody for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening for some of you. We really appreciate you coming and for this security awareness training. We have with us this morning Hainan Landa and Frank Shapani from Optimal Networks. I will let them tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they do, but we're really excited to have them here today. As they said, it is going to be an entertaining and informative presentation for you. So with that, I will pass it over to them. And thank you very much for being with us today. Also, for anybody who joined us late, I mentioned earlier on that if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A as we go, and we'll address those as they come up. Okay, great. Thanks so much. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much. I'm actually very excited to be partnering with you guys, and this is our second webinar with you, and I'm happy to be part of your conference, which looks like it's been very, very successful. So that's phenomenal, and it's a great lineup. So I'm very pleased to be here. As is Frank, I'm speaking for him. Frank, if you could move to the next slide. We're going to be talking about security awareness training or security awareness, and we're going to try to keep it fairly tight. There's a lot of information to cover. You could actually talk about this for hours and hours and hours. We're trying not to do that today, because that would bore you.
Exciting.
Yeah. So I'll introduce us really quickly. I'm Hainan Landa. I'm the founder and CEO of Optimal Networks. I started Optimal Networks when I was 3 years old in 1991. And we have been serving law firms for 3 decades at this point. And I'm just very pleased to be doing it. I'm very pleased to be here with you guys, educating you about security awareness or security. And with me, I have Frank Shapani, who has joined us fairly recently. Like, what is it now? 3 months, 4 months?
Yeah, 4 months.
Yeah, but he's been my client. He was my client for 11 or 12 years, and he has been involved in legal technology for 24,000 years, which is incredible. So let's go on. Let's get to the meat of it. It is a webinar format, so we can't actually see you, and Lindsay told you. So just throw your questions in, chat, Q&A. I'll keep an eye on it the whole way through. Frank is going to do most of my job is going to be to scare you. Okay, I'm going to scare you in just a few slides, and then Frank will tell you how to get out of this. So yeah, this is why it's so important, and this is why we put the words "we need you" on the front of this presentation, which is that of all the data breaches out there, 95% of them started with a phishing attack. So you can put in place all the technical controls, all the antivirus, all the anti-spyware, all that stuff that you want to your heart's content, firewalls. The biggest entryway into the data that is so incredibly important for you, your client data, your data, it's through a phishing attack. It's through an email. It's through social engineering. And that's why this type of training, just the fact that you're sitting on here, and hopefully you can spread this into your organizations a bit, to have a security awareness training program will actually cut that risk down by 70%, which is really, really, really a huge defense against the security and the hacker out there. So for law firms in particular, thank you. That's very good, Frank. I like that. You like read my mind, and it just happened. For law firms in particular, you have security. You have to pay attention to security. You have to pay attention for 3 reasons. It's an ethical obligation, and it's a contractual obligation you have with your clients, and it's actually a regulatory obligation in the sense that you have to report out if you are breached. And different states and different countries have different regulations there. So I won't go deep into that, but you should just know that you're actually required. Not only do you want to keep, from a reputational point of view, keep yourself secure, but you're actually required to from 3 different angles. Now, let's talk about the pandemic, because what would a conference about security be without a moment on the pandemic? Look, hacking is big business. And hacking, there's, and Frank will get into it a little bit more, but the hackers are out there. They're almost like corporations. They are looking to exploit fear. And in many times, in times before the pandemic, you might have gotten an email. Like I got an email, it said your Facebook account has been compromised. I'm like, oh my God, my Facebook account has been compromised. And I clicked my phone and bam, I was taken for a ride, because they're preying on your fear. Well, with the pandemic, they didn't have to make the fear themselves. It showed up and they were ready for it. And just look at it. It's ridiculous. 667% increase in attacks since the pandemic. All these numbers that I'm throwing around are verified. We've got studies. If you want them, I'm happy to send them to you. But and then the last thing I think I'll say before I hand it over to someone who will help us get out of this situation is that there's sort of a sense, maybe not as much right now. I hope we've been doing security awareness training for a few years. That oh, why would anyone want to get me, right? Why would anyone want to get a law firm? I'm not containing all that data. Well, in fact, you are. In fact, you are a phenomenal conduit for the data of your clients. Law firms, if you think about it, law firms are the last place on earth where people go to deposit their secrets, right? So all this confidential information, all this private information, no matter if your clients are corporate or consumers or whatever they are, you have it, and hackers want it, and they're getting smarter and smarter about how they get to you and how they get your data. Okay, that is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt portion of the show. Frank, it's all you now.
Thank you very much, Hainan. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about what the attacker's motivation is. Before we start talking about how to defend ourselves, let's talk about what the attackers are doing. Let's understand a little bit more about the hacker ecosystem. So what are they after? I think ultimately, most of the time, almost all the time, it's money, right? They want to extract money from our organizations or from other organizations. Now, they may do that in a variety of different ways. They may get you to send money to them directly with some sort of wire fraud or invoice fraud or gift card fraud. We'll talk about some examples of those. They may want to steal your passwords or other important information. That's information that they can then use to launch a further attack or sell to somebody else and make money. They may want to install malware in your computer. This is one of the most common ones. And again, this is something that there's a monetary value to the attacker to getting malware on your computer. They can sell access to your computer to somebody else or use that access themselves to launch some other attack. There are, of course, some other motivations from time to time. It could be reputational damage. It could be, some sort of other kind of thing where they just want to bring somebody down because they disagree politically or something like that. We do see that, and law firms have from time to time been subject to that. I've spent the last 19 years working in law firms in various IT roles, and there have been clients that are nation states that don't agree with what we're doing, kind of thing, and so it is a possibility that's something other than money, but most of the time it's money. Let's think about what the attackers look like, because we all have an image in our mind of like, well, what is a hacker? What do they look like? How are they operating? So probably a lot of us have this vision in our mind. There's this guy sitting in his basement, and he's pounding away on a keyboard and he's trying to get into things, right? This is the kind of image you might still see in movies these days. Here's the more modern equivalent. All right, they've always got a hoodie on, right? Because they're doing something dastardly. I wear a hoodie, I'm not dastardly, but anyhow, so it's something like this, but a lone operator, right? But in reality, what it really looks like is this. There's a bunch of people, they look just like you and me, they work in a company. I mentioned before, you think of these people as corporations because they are. There's in a lot of countries around the world where the laws on these things are a little bit looser than other places. You can have a legitimate company whose job is to write malware, or whose job is to insert that malware into people's computers, or to launch phishing attacks. And these are like legitimate companies in these countries. They have HR departments. People have badges to swipe in to get access to the building. They're all working from home these days, just like we are. So same kind of thing. So it's important to understand, what these people look like and how they operate so we can better defend ourselves against them. All right, so let's walk through a typical attack scenario. So again, you get a little bit more insight into what this is looking like. So picture this. This is someone who's, works for one of these companies, could be a lone person, but likely works for one of these companies and is a researcher. This person's job is to research. What are they researching? They're researching us. They're finding information about us and about our organizations on lots of publicly available sources. Social media is a great one. Websites, there's a ton of information out there about all of us and about all of our organizations. And it's relatively straightforward for these people to learn not only our names, information about us, where we work, but who we work for, who we report to, who reports to us, and what our role is in our organization. What our dog's name is, what our family's members' names are, what we like to do for fun, where we might be on a particular day. There's lots of information out there about us. That's just on the internet. So they're doing that research and they're making it available to the next person in the chain. So this might be somebody, I don't know if anybody, I threw some old time images. Did anybody recognize this person? This is Ernestine. Lily Tomlin is Ernestine from Laugh-In, 1960s. But someone who's kind of working in that call center role. They're calling people up, pretending that they're from Microsoft. Hello, I'm from Microsoft. There's a problem with your computer. I'm here to help you, right? A lot of us have received calls like this. Their job is to take that information that the researcher put together and launch some sort of attack against you. And it may be calling you, it may be just sending you an email, maybe something else. But they're making use of the research that was done earlier. Here's another person that's sort of parallel in the chain. This is the malware writer, right? So this is a person who could be within the same organization, or maybe Ernestine bought the malware on the internet. You can buy malware. It's pretty easy to do. She bought it and she's going to make use of it. But there's people whose job it is to write malware. Just like people write any kind of other software, people write malware. This particular picture is an actual malware writer who was caught. His name is Mark Vartanian. As alleged, he created all kinds of nasty malware several years ago. But anyhow, he writes the malware, he sells it to Ernestine. Ernestine is trying to get it inserted onto our computer. So let's say she's successful, right? She calls us up pretending she's from Microsoft and she gets us to install it. Or she sends us a phishing email, we click on the link, the malware gets installed. What happens next? So maybe they're using that malware to steal our credentials. This is just an example. Lots of different things can happen. But let's say they're using it to steal our credentials. Well, what do they have now? They have our username and password. They can maybe log into our mailbox. They take control of our mailbox. What are they doing? They're trying to impersonate us or impersonate somebody to gain our trust, to get somebody to do something they shouldn't do, right? So we went on to the impersonation stage. There's another reference here. This is Leonardo DiCaprio from Catch Me If You Can. I highly recommend, it's a good movie, but I recommend you watch it because it's talking about a lot of this stuff that we're talking about here in a non-cyber way. So this person, I forget his real name, was doing this in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but he was impersonating people. He was gaining people's trust. That's why they call him confidence men, con man, right? They gain your confidence and they get you to do things you shouldn't do. What was his goal? He wanted money, right? So he was the end of the attack, and eventually that successful attack gets this person money. All right, now it's time for the psychology portion of the program. How do they do it? What tools are they using to get us to do things we shouldn't do? They're using social engineering techniques. And in this context, what does social engineering mean? It means techniques to take advantage of our natural inclination to trust people. So we as human beings are designed to be trusting. We live in societies with other people, in social groups, and those social groups don't work if there's not some mechanism for us to trust other people. So the social engineering, people using social engineering techniques are taking advantage of that inclination to trust and tricking it into serving their own purposes. Right? And these days, that's getting worse and worse for us because our lives are moving at a faster and faster pace. We've got more and more stuff going on. And think about how you make decisions every day about how you consider something trustworthy or not. Back in the day, in most of human history, how did we do that? We looked at somebody in the eye, because we could only communicate with people face to face. There were no telephones, there was no nothing, right? You communicate with someone face to face, you look at them, you say, yes, I know this person, I trust them. I can tell from their actions that they're a trustworthy person. And okay, so I trust them. But now all of that stuff is gone. There is no more face-to-face communication. There's very little, right? So now even with the pandemic, there's even less. Every interaction we have with other people is at a distance, right? So this is why Hainan said the attacks have quadrupled and they've been much more successful, because the attackers have this advantage of, we have completely lost our normal ways of evaluating people and making trust decisions. The other thing is, the faster we go, the more shortcuts we start looking for to make those trust decisions, to make those evaluations. So what are the kind of shortcuts we might use? Well, if someone else trusts somebody, maybe I don't know this person in the social group very well, but my best friend knows them and they trust them, so I trust them too, right? So the social engineers, the attackers, are looking for those kinds of advantages and saying, if I can trick you into thinking I'm somebody that you trust, then you'll trust me too, right? And that's how all these attacks work. I think it's really important to understand the psychology behind these attacks so that you can work to defeat them and not fall victim to them. And ultimately, what the attackers always want us to do is act without thinking, right? So this is where I start talking slow, because I want you to start thinking slowly when subject to something like this. When you see something unfamiliar, you're not sure what it is, I want you to slow down. I want you to take a few extra seconds to look at it critically, because the faster we go, the more likely we are to fall for something. If we slow things down when we sense there's a risky situation, then almost always you can use the techniques I'm about to show you to identify problems and stop them before something bad happens. So don't act without thinking first, slow it down, take a few extra seconds, and look critically at what's presented to you. All right. So let's get into the details of what to look for. How do you identify when something is fraudulent, something is part of an attack, and tell that from, weed out the good from the bad? How do you sniff out a phishing email? We're going to be talking a lot about phishing emails because that's where most of the attacks are coming from. That's the vector that's most commonly used. We'll talk about other things too, but this is the most common one. All right, what are some phishing red flags? If you notice poor spelling, poor grammar, poor punctuation in any kind of communication, that is a definite red flag. And everybody's seen this. And if you're like me, you've wondered to yourself, why can't someone who's trying to, do some sort of attack, why don't they proofread their messages before they send them? Why do they have all these mistakes? Because if I see the mistakes, I know this is probably garbage. Why are they doing this? Well, it turns out they're doing it on purpose. Why would they do it on purpose? What they want to do is weed out those of us who are paying attention from those of us who are not paying attention. They want to put their efforts into those of us who are not paying attention. So if you catch the problems and you say, this is garbage, I'm just going to get rid of it, well, they don't want to invest their time in you because you're not likely to fall for their scheme. They want to invest their time and resources into people who are, I'll say, more gullible, right? For whatever reason, they're just more likely to fall for it. So if you miss those obvious signs, the poor spelling, the poor grammar, the poor punctuation, well, then you're likely to miss other things too. And you're just a much richer target for them.
I'll throw in a comment that they're sending out hundreds of thousands of emails, right? So they really do need a way to narrow that down to the people who are most likely to fall for their tricks. And this is a very good way for them to do it.
Yep. Okay, next one. If you don't know the sender, you weren't expecting the message, be suspicious, right? So of course we always receive messages from people that we don't necessarily know, weren't necessarily expecting. So it's not necessarily the sign of doom and gloom, but it is something that should make you just a little bit more suspicious. So if you don't know where this came from, or even if you recognize the person, but it's sort of unexpected, just be a little bit more suspicious. If you're being asked for personal information like passwords, banking info, or things like that, personal information, definitely be suspicious. This day and age, any legitimate organization or person should know not to ask for this kind of stuff, especially out of the blue. All right, so if you're receiving any requests for this kind of information, absolutely be suspicious of it. Does it still happen from time to time from some legitimate source where they're asking for this? Yes, it might. And when I encounter with that, I reprimand the person and say, you can't be asking people for stuff in this way because they're going to think you're spamming or you're phishing. If you're not addressed by name, this is another one where, yeah, we get emails all the time where we're not specifically addressed by name. It may be a newsletter or something like that, but if it's not a newsletter or some form letter or something that would make sense for it to be generically addressed, and they're not addressing you by name with some message that seems like it's sent just to you, that's a red flag. Again, it could happen legitimately, but be suspicious of it. If there's a file attachment or link that you weren't expecting, same as the one above, basically, this does happen from time to time, but really people these days should know to give some warning, you know, or make sure the person knows, I'm going to be sending you this thing, this is the tool we use, or whatever, right? So if it's something out of the blue you weren't expecting, be suspicious, right? So add all these things up. Here's an example. Here's an example of someone trying to send a file to me in this case. And I take a look at this message. You know, this is just an extract of an email I received. You know, what do I see here? I'm going to start picking out some of the things I just talked about. Item number 1, where is this coming from? Look at the email address. So this is coming from something called alert notification. So it's not coming from person. So that should be my first point of suspicion. Then we look at the actual address, and it's coming from OneDrive.org. So OneDrive is a tool that Microsoft has for sharing files and doing other things, but it would be OneDrive.com, if anything, not OneDrive.org. .org just doesn't make any sense. Then look at the first part of it, A1ERT. So alert is supposed to look like, why? Again, this is a kind of probably a purposely inserted mistake to see if I'm paying attention. All of this stuff just doesn't add up. This makes me suspicious, right? And that's just point number 1. Point number 2, look at email subjects. A lot of times we skip over that because we don't think it's, you know, super important, but they are important. It's a really good source of information about this. So this one says, a OneDrive file for you, exclamation point. Why are they so excited about sending me a file on OneDrive? It's not that exciting of a thing. So again, it just looks a little funny. I see a generic icon here I'm not familiar with. Again, not a certain sign, but just, you know, I added to the list of things that are suspicious. Files have been submitted to OneDrive. Grammar problem, right? So by this point, I'm 4 suspicious things in. This one's bad news, I can tell already. What do they want me to do? They want me to click on that big blue button. They want me to not read all of that stuff. I like, you know, because we're looking to go fast, right? We're looking for the shortcuts. What do? I look for the biggest, brightest thing and I press it, right? Because that's what we're trained to do. That's what the attacker wants us to do. I press that button, it downloads a file with malware in it. They've won, right? So that's what we want to avoid. So look at the things that are suspicious and again, slow it down, take a few extra seconds to read everything, look at it, think critically about it. All right, here's another example. Again, an email. This one is trying to make some sort of false sense of urgency, put a false sense of urgency in me. So what's happening here? So the first thing is I see that this message is generically addressed. I'm going to turn on my laser pointer. It's not sent to my name, it's sent to my organization's name. This is an example of organization here, but so it's not addressed to me. It doesn't say, hello, Frank. Your mail server is experiencing some deliver problems. All right, so there's a grammar problem right off the bat. It doesn't make any sense, but again, easy for me to skip over that. But I'm saying something about deactivating my mailbox on Tuesday. Well, I want to fix that. Well, don't worry, click this big orange button and we'll fix it for you. All right, I clicked the big orange button without looking at anything else, right? Because if you look in the rest of this message, there's a bunch of other things that don't make any sense, but it's too late, I've already pressed the button. What can you do when there are links in the email? You've probably heard this. Hover over the link or the button and see where it actually goes. So where does this one actually go? So if you hover over this button, this is what you would see. I've made it extra big, so it's hopefully easier for you to see. So it's going to a website that actually looks like the website of the organization that, in this case, I work for, nashp.org. That's the first part of it. But then if I look more closely, again, I have to slow down and look more closely. Well, it's not actually going to that nashp.org. It's going to nashp.org.dukers.net. Well, what on earth is that? I don't know what that is. And I can tell you, I can assure you it's bad news. Whatever it is, you don't want it. Right? So again, slow it down, take a look at these extra things, hover over the links. If you're not sure, ask somebody. If you're not sure, don't just click on it to see what happens. Ask somebody first, right? Your IT department, your IT folks, whatever resource you have, can look at things that you might not be able to see. They can take more time with it. They can evaluate it, and they can let you know if it's real or not. Because sometimes, you know, it's 50-50, right? You know, it may be legitimate. All right, so we'll keep looking at some more examples of these red flags. So what if you're being asked to log into something? What are you being asked to log into? So here's an example, similar to one you might have seen. So you've clicked on something in an email or even on a website, and you get a login prompt, right? So maybe in this case, someone's trying to share a file with me, but they've asked me I have to log into the system to get the file. Well, there it's asking me, what am I logging into? I'm logging into my mailbox to get your file. Well, that doesn't necessarily make any sense. What is this? So this is an attempt for someone to steal my credentials, right? So again, we get login prompts all the time, right? What do we do when we see login prompts? We dutifully type in our email address and password. You see that? You have your Pavlovian response. It says email, I type in email. It says password, I type in my password. I don't think about it, right? That's exactly what the attacker wants you to do. Don't do that. You see a login prompt, think about what it is you're logging into, particularly when they're coming up at an unexpected time. It's not when you first turn on your computer. It's not when you first go to some system that you use every day. It's coming up out of the blue. It's suspicious. Understand what it is you're logging into. Then also look for the other signs we talked about, right? So right off the bat, we've got grammar and punctuation problems. Why isn't this capitalized? Sign in with your organization account to view document. How do they know it's a document? How do they know it's not a picture? Think about these things. Look at the icons you see. Are they outdated Office icons? This one says Office 365 Personal. Well, a lot of organizations use Office 365 these days, but organizations don't use Office 365 Personal. They use Office 365 for Business, or whatever Microsoft's calling it these days, right? So look for the signs. Sometimes they're pretty subtle. Look at domain names. This is a much more popular way to trick people these days, is by creating fake domain names that look like your domain names. So take a look at this example, which may be familiar to you. And I'll give you a second just to take a close look at it and see if you can figure out what's wrong with this. And Lindsay, you might already know. You can shout it out if you feel like it.
The why.
It's the why, right? So this one, I made it extra big so you can see it, but think about you're going to a website, or this might appear in an email address. These things show up small. We sometimes don't notice them. Sometimes they don't show up at all, right? If you're looking at something from a mobile device, you don't necessarily see the URLs. You don't necessarily see the email addresses, or they show up really tiny. I could easily look at this and say, there's a bit of dust on my screen,
We once had, with optimal networks, they replaced the L with a 1. And it's almost impossible to see. It's almost impossible to see.
Yeah, it's incredibly easy and very difficult to spot. My favorite one is, unfortunately, you don't have a letter P in your URL, but it's to replace the P with a Cyrillic R, which looks just like a P. Right? And that's like almost impossible to see when it shows up small, right? But why are they doing this? Because, in this instance, maybe they've created a whole fake website that looks like your website, which is really easy to do. But more commonly, they're registering this domain name, setting up a mailbox. Remember, they've done that research, right? So they know you, they know all your colleagues, their names and everything. So they can register a domain name that looks like your domain name, create mailboxes on it, and start sending you emails as your colleagues, but with this different domain name. This is super common these days. Particularly as part of invoice fraud, which is trying to get you to pay invoices that don't actually exist. All right, if you're being asked to do something unusual that needs to be done urgently. I talked before about creating that false sense of urgency in you, because when someone asks us to do something quickly, we want to respond to that. Remember what I said about psychology. We're social animals. We want to be helpful. Generally, people want to help other people. That's how we're wired. Right? And that's, of course, a good thing. But in this context, it ends up hurting us. So they want us to have some sort of urgency. Somebody important in our lives needs something, and they need it right away. Right? So probably by now, everybody's seen some example of this kind of thing, where you receive an email that looks like it's from somebody, typically, your supervisor, your boss, and they need something. Have you got a minute? I need you to do something right away. But don't try to call me. I'm in an important meeting. I'm with clients. I'm whatever. So just respond or just do this thing, right? So what do? When we get a message like that? You get nervous, right? My boss needs something. Maybe they're agitated already, and so I don't want to screw around. I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to try to ask them questions about it. You start taking shortcuts, right? Because you want to act fast, right? And that's exactly what the attacker wants you to do. So if you see something like this, I want you to follow the same thing I've been saying, slow it down, take a close look at it. What is this actually? Where is it coming from? So, I made up this example, but, I probably you've seen something, Lindsay, maybe you've seen something exactly like this before. So it's coming from someone on your board, right? But it's not really. I changed the domain name slightly. In this case, it's coming from China instead of Czechoslovakia, or I don't remember what it was. Czech Republic, sorry.
There are an inordinate number of people in my company who think I've asked them to wire me funds or give me gift cards for the staff.
Yeah, I mean, it happens more frequently than you can possibly imagine, and it's successful in an incredibly large amount of time. And where I've seen this been successful, when people come to me after the fact, wondering what happened, is typically newer people to the organization, because they're the most likely to get nervous about this kind of thing, and less, they've just maybe not seen as much of it before. So you want to make sure that new people coming into your organization get training like this as soon as possible, because they're going to get targeted right away. Particularly law firms. A lot of law firms, if you're an attorney in a law firm, your image and your information goes up on the website on day one, right? So they know about you right away, right? And they're going to start attacking. And don't think that the attackers don't know how law firms operate. They do. They do. And they'll use what they know to their advantage. All right, so again, I won't go through in really detail, but the same kind of thing. Have you got minutes, grammar problems, punctuation problems, but also look at the characteristics of the email. So a lot of times this is pretending to come from somebody that you interact with frequently, right? They're probably your supervisor. But if you interact with that person frequently, you probably have an intuitive sense of what messages from them look like normally, right? How do they construct their subject lines of their email? How do they do their salutations? Do they have a salutation or not? People have a way of constructing emails, just like people have always had ways of constructing letters back when we wrote letters, right? And you do it consistently over time, right? What does your email signature look like? How do you sign off your messages? What kind of things do you say? Do you capitalize things a certain way? If you ask somebody like, how does Pavla, do her subjects? You would probably have no idea. But if you see something that looks unusual, you would recognize it. I don't know what it's supposed to be, but this doesn't look right, So make use of that. If something looks just a little bit off, be suspicious, right? And of course, the way you defeat this kind of thing is to, even if it says don't call, you need to contact this person through some other method. Don't respond to the email, because in this case, you're just responding to the attacker. Send them a text.
And if they put a phone number in to the email, don't call that number. Call the numbers you know.
Right. Yeah, there could be an email signature that's just modified a bit. It could even look like your email signature, because how hard is it to take a logo from a company or from a law firm and put it on there? I would highly encourage law firms, particularly, most law firms have disclaimers and email signatures and stuff. Standardize that. Use a tool. There are lots of good tools, inexpensive tools out there to standardize email signatures. Don't rely on people creating their own signatures in Outlook, because they're not all going to look the same. So not only is it a good idea for marketing, but it's a good idea to defeat this kind of thing. If your email signatures always look the same, again, people will recognize, I know exactly what it's supposed to look like, and this doesn't look like that. Something is off. And it gives you that indication. All right, let's move on. All right, let's talk about different variants of phishing, because I've just talked a lot about phishing emails. But all the same things I just talked about can happen really in any method of communication, right? So if it's a text message, this is getting more and more popular these days, text messages over SMS is called smishing, SMS phishing.
That is my favorite word. Side note.
Pushing, smishing, smashing.
Yeah.
Just a good sounding word, right? But you don't want it. Phone calls and voicemails, this one's called vishing, right? Probably everybody's gotten some variation of this. They're calling from, some tax or revenue service or credit card or something. But the same kind of things I just talked about in the emails are going to show up even in a voicemail. It's going to sound weird, the bad grammar, bad not punctuation, but just like it just won't sound right, And again, they're doing that for the same reason. They're doing that on purpose. social media, right? So all the same stuff that happens in email can happen in social media. Fake Facebook. This has been in the news, obviously, a lot recently in the US because of the elections, but it happens everywhere, I'm sure. So fake social media posts. People can create fake social media accounts. This happens a lot with LinkedIn. I'll create a LinkedIn profile of some person that doesn't exist, but that works for your organization, or more typically will work for some organization that you deal with. And they're trying to gain your trust, right? Well, they're part of the client, right? They're an employee of our client, so I trust them, right? No, they're not real. Don't trust them. So look for the same things when you're using social media. And of course, in person, back when we used to be able to see people in person, and this will happen again someday. But this is the Leo DiCaprio thing, the con man kind of stuff, right? So, but this still happens, right? So still be aware of this. People still come into the office pretending to be a delivery person or pretending to be the appliance repair person or whatever, and they just want to get into the office so they can, it may just be to steal some device, or it may be to steal some information, or even just intelligence gathering.
One of our standard, like when we do a security assessment for someone, one of our standard thing is to literally come in wearing a baseball cap as a courier and bring a package and say, where's your, even to the receptionist, where's your server room? Can we get in? We have to drop this off. And we just try to get into the server room without announcing who we are. We work with your IT. Let us in, and you would be surprised as to how many times we've actually done that and gotten in.
And the primary reason why that happens, why that's so successful, because even if the person greeting the person at the door understands all of this stuff, people have a really hard time turning others away because you want to be helpful, right? You don't want to say, I'm sorry, I can't let you in, because you don't want to be mean, right? But what the right thing to do is maybe escort that person to wherever it is they say they need to go. So if they got a delivery, you physically escort them to your office services folks and take them to a person. Don't leave them there by themselves.
Yeah, or have the server room locked and not everyone can get into it too.
Right. All right. Okay. Sorry about the laser pointer there going crazy. All right. We talked a bit about this before. If you weren't expecting a link or an attachment, don't click on it. I'm saying this again because I can't emphasize it enough. That's what the attacker wants you to do. Again, they want you to act without thinking, and they just want you to click on stuff. But this is where the attack actually is successful or not successful with these kinds of attacks. If you don't click on it, it's fine. Just delete the message, but you should still report it also, so in case other people have received it. But don't click on stuff. And again, if you're not sure, because sometimes you can't necessarily tell, and I've seen plenty of times where it ends up being legitimate but looks like phishing, ask somebody for help. Ask your IT resources for help, because they can see things that you can't see. Don't take identities at face value. I normally talk, I have an example here, but to save time, I cut out the actual screenshot of it. But let's talk a little bit about invoice fraud and how that works, because that's getting much more popular these days, and it can be incredibly expensive to be the victim of an invoice fraud. So in the typical thing, the typical kind of attack, the attackers are using all the techniques I just talked about. They're creating fake domain names. They're doing research. They are compromising maybe the resources of some other organization in order to target you. So picture this example. Maybe the attacker has compromised a mailbox at a vendor that you work with, right? So they haven't compromised anything in your systems. They've compromised somebody else's mailbox, or they've created a domain name that's similar to that other organization. So this has nothing to do with you yet, right? So then they get some information about an invoice. They know that they've done research, so they probably know a lot about who your clients are because you put case studies and things on your website, right? So they will craft some sort of invoice that they may send from your vendor to you, or maybe even from you to one of your clients, right? And they want eventually you to pay, somebody to pay the amount of that invoice to them instead of where it should go. And I've seen this firsthand. The law firm I just came from, a mailbox at our client was compromised. And so the attacker got copies of the invoices that my firm had sent to the client. And this was to the tune of about 250,000 euros, this invoice, right? The client was on the cusp of paying this amount to the attacker before we figured it out. Before we started, somebody noticed that in the chain of email communication back and forth about these invoices, because of course they were past due, like most of them are, somebody noticed that the domain name didn't look quite right. The domain name of not only our firm, but the client firm as well. So they registered domain names of both ones that were, in our case, they added an L to the LLP, right? So it was LLP, and then a similar kind of thing at the client, right? So it almost worked. And like I said, 250,000 euros, that's a lot of money, right? It almost worked. So all the stuff I'm talking about, all the signs were there. When I was presented with all the information, I looked through it. I was like, everything I've just talked about in the past half an hour, it was an example of everything I just talked about was in there.
And Frank,
but people just missed it.
I don't know, will you be talking about ACH later, or can I mention it real quick?
Go for it.
During the pandemic, a lot of people moved from paper-based invoices to ACH, to electronic payment. So there's a whole spate of this same type of attack going on with people saying, we are switching to ACH. You have fake emails to clients. We are switching to ACH. Please use this account number to start paying us. And they work. And people are like, yeah, of course you are. And then the next few payments go off to this ACH mailbox instead of to you. And it was very real. A lot of money went this way.
If you see the acronym ACH in a message, that is, bad news, right? But it's not always, because of course organizations do legitimately change banks and ACH information changes. But what do? Make sure all of your people in finance, they hopefully already know this, but if they don't, make extra sure and make sure to remind them every 3 months, because people forget. If you see ACH, somebody said, oh, we've updated our bank, here's a new ACH information. Call that organization and verify. Call them with a number you know to be legitimate, not a number in the email that you received that says you've changed the ACH information. Go to their website, or hopefully you have, your own internal resources for phone numbers for that company. Call somebody you know, verify that, make sure, because once that money goes out, it's almost impossible to get it back. And that takes me to the next slide, which is get written and verbal verification for all financial transfers. Right, I can't emphasize this enough. And actually, I didn't take out my example. Here it is right here. So here is an example of invoice fraud. And I'll just point out, where the domain name here, easy to miss. They just added a letter to it, added an S to this. A lot of organizations have a long domain name, so it's really easy to miss that. They had compromised the mailbox. So this was an invoice this for $5,088. I was expecting this invoice because I had just purchased something from this company, and I expected an invoice of $5,088. And all it would have taken for me to forward this on to my accounts payable group and say, here you go, pay this. This was for this software. Right? It was super close. This was only $5,000, but like I said, it could be $200,000 easily. But we saw some signs, right? And same signs I talked about before: bad spelling, punctuation, grammar, right? ACH. So we saw that stuff. Said, oh, let's just verify because this looks a little weird. We called up this company and they said, no, we just found out there was a compromise. Somebody's mailbox was hacked. So they got copies of invoices, and that's how the attack was launched. Super, super common. All right. So we move on to a little different topic. Got just about 10 minutes left. Let's talk about passwords. This is my last movie reference. If you recognize this, this is Spaceballs, the movie, 1987. But ahead of its time, just like Catch Me If You Can, ahead of its time, because they're talking about passwords back in 1987, and not only bad passwords, but bad passwords, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you know how many people still use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for their password? Well, now it has to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Because it's got to be 8 characters. And you put an exclamation point after it because it's got to have a special character, right? People still do this. And you might be one of them. If you are, don't do it, right? If you know people who do, tell them, don't do that. Don't be the person with, an idiot would put this on his luggage, right? So let's talk about passwords. What should you do? I want you to use strong passwords. and I want you to use a password manager. Let's dive into that a little bit. So here's some password best practices, some more details on what you do and what not to do. Don't use personal information in your passwords, right? We talked about the research that first lady in that example was doing. Do you think, you know, your address or your dog's name or your whatever, like, do you think they don't know that stuff? They know that stuff, right? They can figure it out because it's on your Instagram, right? So don't use personal information in your passwords. Don't repeat passwords across accounts. Why do we say this? Because imagine if some organization that you deal with, and this happens pretty frequently, say it's LinkedIn, you have a password for LinkedIn, right? You say, oh, I'll just use the same password for Facebook. What's the difference, right? LinkedIn gets breached, which happened, right? LinkedIn got a huge breach several years ago. Millions and millions and millions of people's username and password was exposed and published on the internet, and it remains published on the internet to this day. So if you use this, you know, so you got credentials that you use for LinkedIn and they were just exposed. And LinkedIn, of course, they invalidate all those things. So you can't log in as you to LinkedIn with that anymore. But you use the same credentials on Facebook, right? So the attacker is going to try that. You know, if you use it here, you maybe use it other places. So maybe they log in, they can log into you as Facebook. What if you use that for your bank account, for your credit cards? They'll log into your bank account. They're going to try this, and they have automated tools that will just do this. You know, they'll do millions of them per minute, and they'll get in as some people. And if they get into your financial institutions, your money's gone before you can blink an eye. Right? So do not use the same credentials across accounts. Don't write them down. This one should be obvious. I'm not even going to say more about it. Don't write them down. Don't use them on public computers, right? Because you don't know what's on that public computer. That could be a keystroke logger that's capturing every button you press on the keyboard, and that's an easy way to steal someone's password.
Frank, I'm going to actually say more about writing them down. It is stunning the number of people that we see. So we serve law firm clients all across the DC metro area, all up and down the East Coast. And our engineers, when they go, if they need to get into someone's computer, obviously we want to do it with the person there, but if they need to test something, it is under the keyboard. The password is in the top drawer. It is with sticky notes. They have like 3 go-to places, and they're a lot of the time. It is stunning. Stop writing down the passwords, please. It's amazing.
So I've just told you a lot of stuff what not to do, but I've just made your life very difficult if you do all those things. So how do you repair that? How do you make that better? All right. So I want you to use passwords that are more than 8 characters. All right. So I'm making your life difficult again. But how do you do that? How do you remember long passwords? Use a passphrase. Passphrase is different than a password in that it's a series of words, a piece of a sentence or a full sentence, or just 3 or 4 unrelated words. These are much easier to remember than strings of nonsense, right? So you can make them pretty long. It's really easy to make it. Even a short sentence can be 25 characters. And you can include punctuation, you can include grammar, but they're really easy to type. They're really easy to remember. But you still may have a lot of them because you don't want to use them, you share them across accounts. So use a password vault, a password manager. There are a lot of really good password manager programs out there that are either free or very inexpensive. They work really well. They plug into your browsers. They'll put the information right into the websites for you. They are secure if you protect them with 2-factor authentication. All of the good ones will offer 2-factor authentication. A lot of them are optional. Make sure you turn it on. Next point, use 2-factor authentication wherever you possibly can. Right? So your organization probably has hopefully already instituted this for the systems that you use internally. But for your personal stuff also, you have a Gmail account, Yahoo, Outlook, whatever kind of email you use, think about all the information that exists about you and the damage that somebody could do with access to your email. Right? So all these companies make 2-factor authentication available. You just have to turn it on. So if you're using Gmail, it's really easy to just turn them on. And they're pretty easy to use as well. So passphrases, password vault, 2-factor authentication. Let's talk about how to actually create these strong passwords and what some examples are of really bad passwords and why. Right, so here's a password that meets most complexity requirements that are still in play today because it has a capital letter, a lowercase letter, and a special character. It has that 3 of 4 magic thing, right? Is this a good password? Absolutely not. And so let's talk a little bit about how people who are attacking passwords, how they try to crack passwords. Right. So attackers will have systems that can guess billions of combinations of passwords per second. Billions per second. Right. So they are comparing random strings that they put into password hashes that they've stolen from some system. And that's incredibly easy. I won't get into the details, but it's very easy for them to get to the point where they can do this. So if your password is football exclamation point, they have algorithms that are going to guess all the common words in any language, right? How many words are there in most languages? 30 and 40,000, you know, some more, some fewer, but not that many compared to billions, right? It doesn't take them long to go through a whole list of words in any language, and they'll do multiple languages. And they will add an exclamation point. They'll do capital letter in the front, right? They can guess billions per second, so football will come up pretty quickly. And football, there are five of the top 10 password words that I remember, so don't use these. These are the first ones that the attackers are going to guess. I'm sorry, this is US centric, but football, baseball, I love you, the word password, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Some others are QWERTY or AZERTY, depending on the kind of keyboard you use. It's one of those, you know, the first string of characters in the top row of the keyboard. So those are the first ones they're going to guess. So this password, even though it meets the complexity requirements, can be cracked just about instantly. Well, how about this one? This is a different word. It's not one of the top 5 password words. So unicorn is not a super common word, but it's still a word. And if you put a two-digit number after it, is that fooling anybody? No. So you've got 100 different unicorns they can try, but still, that's 100 compared to billions of guesses, right? So this is a little bit better, but not a whole lot better. So 13 minutes to crack this one. But how about this one? This is more aligned with what I was talking about before. Sorry, hang on, I was supposed to take that first word out. Hilltop happens to be one of our competitors, so we're gonna take that word out. But anyhow, pick 3 or 4 words. They can be related, they can be part of a sentence. But think about this password compared to ones that you might be using now. So the unicorn 23 example, you know, it's not that difficult to remember, but you've also probably asked to change it every 3 months, right? So what's your password going to be in 3 months? Unicorn 24. What's it going to be in 6 months? Unicorn 25. And people do this all the time. So what does that do? It weakens the password. They're trying to make these rules to make your password stronger. They've actually made it weaker. And then they encourage you to put all kinds of crazy characters in it so you can't remember it, so you're more likely to write it down, right? So it just makes the situation worse. So the new standards that were released by various government agencies several years ago call for 15 character passwords, but no more complexity requirements and no more password expiration. So go back to your IT people in your firms and tell them, hey, you know, if you're US centric, say NIST just said this. If you're international, say ISO just said this. And it was like 4 years ago at this point. This should be our new password rules. We shouldn't have to have password expiration anymore. We shouldn't have to have these weird complexity rules anymore. You have to have 2-factor authentication though. None of this applies if you don't have that.
Because it's a lot harder to get name, password, and your phone, right? That's why you want the 2-factor authentication. It's one thing for a hacker to find your username and find your password. It's another thing for them to actually get control of your phone. It's really tough. Can be done. So
we have just a couple more minutes. I'm going to go quickly. So this password is pretty easy to remember. It's very easy to type. Picture you're typing on your mobile device. It's gotten, you don't have to figure out where the character is and all that stuff, like different keyboards. Really easy to type, really easy to remember, and really, really difficult for an attacker to crack. 14,000 years to do this one. Take it a step further. Take one of those words and misspell it. Easy for me because I'm good at misspelling things, right? So now it's not even a word in the word list. So this one would take 3 billion years, even at billions of combinations per second. Right, here's one that's still like that, but it's using those top 5 words. So this one is still more or less useless. So avoid those words, please. 16 seconds. If you're still doing this with swapping out the vowels with special characters, don't bother. You're making your life difficult. You're making it not any harder for the attacker. So this one is still a pretty useless password. here's the website I use to get the measurements on these things. If you're interested, I think the slides will be available if you want to take a look at that. I say again, use multi-factor authentication wherever you possibly can. Super easy these days, included with most services that you use. If there's a bank or credit card or something that you work with that doesn't offer this, and in fact, these days, if they don't enforce it, switch banks because they're behind the times. Incredibly powerful tool for preventing attacks.
Do you know American Express does not have this?
I don't work with American Express. I wouldn't.
I'm not telling you not to use American Express. I'm just commenting.
And last but not least, if you think your machine has been compromised, or if you think anything suspicious might have happened, you can turn off your computer, or more important, call your support as soon as possible. Call fast. Don't wait. Don't say, something might have happened. We'll see how it goes, right? By then, the damage is done. The sooner you report something, the sooner action can be taken to mitigate the problem if there's a problem, right? Your IT resources need time to investigate. They need time to triage. They need time to take action. The longer you wait, the more damage can be done, right? And I'm talking about an hour or two is too long, right? So as soon as you get some inclination, something might be off, report it, right? Don't think you're wasting people's time. All right. So I took it right down to the wire.
Very nicely.
Nicely done. All right. If there are any questions, please put those into the chat or the Q&A for us. But thank you very much. That was really terrifying. And I think everyone's going to go and change their passwords immediately if they haven't already been operating under those improved guidelines as it is.
And we have a couple of infographics and things that we can send over that will sort of help encapsulate this in easy format, things you can put on your refrigerators. Oh, I guess everyone's home. So yeah, put it on your refrigerators. And I would generally recommend doing this as part of an ongoing program of training, of ongoing emails for people to remind them about security practices, and even to do phishing simulation attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we include in all of our services to our clients, and it's there's a bunch of companies out there that do it, but like KnowBe4 is one that's very popular, and they send fake phishing emails, and it's just like if you get one, it sends you to a video to do more training. Like if you get caught, it just trains you more. So they're very useful to teach.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I know especially it's one thing to learn about it from an educational standpoint, but until you actually have it happen to you, and in a more protected environment where, you know, there's no real downside to clicking on something, and find out maybe who your weaker links are, so that, you know, you're protecting yourself on a regular basis. And as you say, to do it on a regular basis, and especially when you bring in some new people to your firms, to make sure that they're getting that training as well, because firms do make a big splash when they hire people, as they should, but that also highlights them to potential hackers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was caught by this phishing simulation package. So they immediately labeled me as a first-time clicker and forced me to watch a video about phishing.
Oh dear. That's embarrassing.
IT people are not immune. We're just not. Nobody is.
Well, that's good to know. You know, then we all should be checking our ego and making sure we're well trained. Well, I don't see any questions coming in, so that means everyone must know everything they need to know. But I will include Hainan and Frank's contact information in the follow-up email that I send out, along with the recording of this session. And we will get the slides for you as well and send those along too. Thank you very much for this incredibly informative and entertaining presentation. And we look forward to involving everybody in the rest of the conference today and tomorrow as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.